Before we start, I want you to listen to Brittany Harden as she describes some of her storms.
I've had about 7 surgeries on my hands. When I was born with a disease, or it's a syndrome, and it's called syndactyly. So these 3 fingers that are now separated were one. I had my first surgery at 6 months to separate my pinky from these 2. And then after that, I had the second surgery, then to separate these 2 out. Roughly 2 years ago, my esophagus started to narrow, and when it did, it made my whole digestive system kind of go out of whack. So when I go out to eat, there can be no fat, no tomatoes, anything that's acid-based. Then there's no seasonings, super lean meat, less than 10% fat, which makes it literally impossible hardly to find food anywhere. So on top of all of my medical issues that I deal with on a daily basis, then I have my family. My biological father has been an alcoholic for my entire life. And at 12 years old, my parents divorced. And because of all of this, now he's ended up in prison. My dad's in jail because he actually shot his ex-girlfriend, and he threatened to come and kill me and my brother.
Brittany's faced a lot. Maybe you're in a storm. You didn't plan on it. It was completely unexpected, but you're in the middle of it, and you're wondering if you'll survive. Could be a physical storm. You thought you were in good health, and all of a sudden things changed, and now you're fighting with what little strength you have, wondering if you'll make it through this storm. Maybe it's a relational storm with your spouse, your kids, your parents, or a friend. And the relationship that meant so much to you is now in deep trouble. Maybe your financial boat is getting rocked by heavy waves. You're sinking deeper and deeper in debt and wondering if you'll ever be able to get your head above water again. Maybe it's an emotional storm. For you, the storm is internal. You're fighting a battle no one else can see. With depression, anxiety, or fear, you're in a storm. Storms hurt. They hurt physically, emotionally, relationally, financially. Storms leave you vulnerable. When you're in the middle of a storm, you're weak and searching. You're desperate for an answer, any way out. If you're in a storm, listen to me, be careful. Because manipulators are attracted to people in desperate storms. They offer false hope, fake peace, an easy way out. I've seen it so many times. In a storm, people reach to the wrong people for help and find themselves in a bigger storm. You know what I'm talking about. You've seen it. A relationship breaks up. How many times have you seen someone leave that unhealthy relationship and run right to another relationship that's even more unhealthy? Be careful. You are most vulnerable when you're in a storm. In a storm, you lose your sense of purpose and direction. You switch from mission to survival, and you get off course. In Matthew chapter 8, the disciples found themselves in a literal storm on the Sea of Galilee. We pick it up in verse 23. Then Jesus got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, before we even really start the story, I have to share with you an important fact. The disciples followed Jesus into that boat. If you go back to verse 18, you read this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. It was Jesus' plan. It was Jesus' idea to be in that boat, on that sea, at that time. This may be the most important thing you learn today. Storms come even when you're following Jesus. If you're in a storm and you're wondering where you went wrong, I want to encourage you, this storm doesn't necessarily mean you've missed God. This storm doesn't necessarily mean there's sin in your life. Now, if you choose not to follow God's commands, will it lead to heartache and failure? Will it lead to a storm? Absolutely. Some storms are of your own making. But often, storms come even though you're following Jesus. Some of you have been taught different. In fact, you were taught wrong. You were led to believe that if you were following Jesus and obeying him and his will, that the waters would always be smooth, the wind would always be calm, and the journey would be easy. That if there's a storm, if you endure hard times, it's because you're not following Jesus closely enough. But the Bible is filled with examples of men and women of God who faced storms, struggles, suffering, and difficulty, even though they were following him. If you're not in a storm, I want to caution you. Be careful you don't judge others who are in a storm, deciding their problems are a result of their disobedience. Because in this instance, obeying Jesus, following Jesus, took the disciples right into the teeth of a fierce storm. And you say, well, if storms come even when I'm following Jesus, what's the point? Why follow? I've got enough storms without him. Well, stay with me because the story isn't over yet. Look again at verse 24. The disciples' plan was a nice leisurely boat ride across the lake with Jesus. And their lunch cruise didn't work out. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so the waves swept over the boat. They didn't have the Weather Channel. Anybody addicted to the Weather Channel? Yeah, my wife is addicted to the Weather Channel. Cindy loves watching storms, and if there's a storm, if there's a tornado warning or anything like that, she'll stay up. A few months ago, she actually woke me up. She came in the bedroom, woke me up, and said, "Wake up, because the tornado sirens might go off." I said, "Hold on a second. So you're telling me to wake up now because you might have to wake me up later?" "Yeah, and I just wanted you to know." Well, I didn't want to know that. Not on any level. But she's right there. They didn't have Weather Channel. They didn't have AccuWeather radar. They didn't have storm sirens. It happened quickly without warning, and those calm seas turned into a heavy, devastating storm. That's what happens in life. Often storms come without warning. You don't expect it. You don't plan for it. You don't see it coming, but suddenly it's there. And instead of smooth, calm waters, you find yourself in a storm. And so much goes through your mind when you face an unexpected, unpredictable storm. You wonder, how long will this last? Will it ever end? Will things ever be normal? Will things ever be okay again? What's next? Could it possibly get worse? Could I take any more? And you wonder, when this is over, what will be left? What kind of damage will be done? Will I have anything? Or will this storm destroy everything I know and love? The disciples didn't expect a storm. But now this group, several of them, by the way, expert fishermen, were fighting for their lives as the waves threatened to sink their boat. And the next 4 words of the story are the most comforting words of all. Look at these 4 words. But Jesus was sleeping. You say, "No, wait a second, Rod. I thought you said those are going to be comforting words." Well, they are if you think about it. The disciples thought they weren't going to make it. They had eluded angry mobs, frustrated Pharisees, and demon-possessed lunatics. But now, the thing that was going to end it all was a thunderstorm. This wasn't a little bit of drizzle and minor turbulence. It was a big storm. The boat was being tossed by wind and waves. Jesus had had a long, hard day. Teaching and praying for people takes a lot of emotional energy. He was tired. Jesus was so disturbed by the storm that he was taking a nap. He was the opposite of Cindy. You notice I didn't make that a sermon point. Jesus is the opposite of Cindy. That'd be bad. But he wasn't freaked out at all. I fly quite a bit. And on one trip a while back, I was sitting on the plane reading my book, and an older lady sat down in the seat next to me, and I could tell she was nervous. And she turned and said, "Do you fly a lot?" I said, "Well, yes, ma'am. I'm not happy about it, but I do." She said, "Are we flying over water on this flight?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, we are." She looked at me, she said, "Does this plane float?" I was pretty sure I didn't need to answer that, so I just looked at her. And she said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'll make sure of that." She said, "Well, I've flown before, but that was before my husband died. And when we flew, I could hold his hand and squeeze it tight. And that's the only way I could keep from going crazy." Well, by now I knew this was going to be an interesting flight. And so I said, "You know what, ma'am? I'm not your husband, but you're welcome to squeeze my hand. I can take it." She said, "Oh, thank you. I'm just so worried about taking off." Now, most of the time, I don't even notice when the plane takes off. I'm already reading or studying. It's not that I'm unaware planes crash. I just have confidence in the plane and the pilot because I've flown before. I've taken off and landed every time. What was boring and mundane to me was dramatic and frightening to her. By the way, the end of the story, she took a Valium and couldn't hold her head up for the rest of the flight. Thank God for medicine. That has nothing to do with the story, but watching her head bob for the rest of the flight was hilarious for me. I got absolutely nothing done, and I had to wake her up at the end. She was anxious and intimidated by the plane flight. I was peaceful and at ease. What frightened her didn't affect me because I'd been through it many times before. It was a scary storm. Well, the disciples panicked. Jesus slept. Here's why that's so encouraging. It lets you know Jesus isn't intimidated by your storm. To you, it seems impossible, unending, devastating. Jesus, on the other hand, isn't frightened by it in the least. He's been through that storm before. Jesus doesn't say, "Oh no, look what Rod's going through. What in the world are we going to do? How do we get him through this? We're in big trouble here. Hey, anybody have an idea? Anybody know what we can do?" I mean, if you have to have surgery, you don't want a doctor who's freaked out and afraid. You don't want your surgeon coming in and saying, "Wow, look at that. How in the world are we going to fix this? Anybody have an idea? I don't even know where to start. I'm afraid to do this one." You don't want that kind of surgeon. What do you want? You want a surgeon who looks at you and says, "I've done this procedure about 1,500 times, and this is ordinary for me." I don't want a scared surgeon. I want a bored surgeon. Right? Well, I don't want to serve a God who panics at my storms. I want to serve a God who's not the least bit afraid or intimidated by my situation because he's been there, he's seen that, and he has the power to completely handle it. The disciples, verse 25, went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Now, the Bible leaves out a few details here that I'd like to know. I want to know, how did they try to handle it? Because surely these expert fishermen tried everything they knew to navigate the storm before they woke up Jesus. They bailed water. They set the rudder directly into the waves. But nothing worked. They weren't in control. The storm was in control. It's one of the most difficult things about storms. You feel out of control and powerless to do anything but react to what happens. You try to handle this situation. You think you can get it under control. Well, we'll borrow the money. We'll spend more time with the children in the evenings. We'll use the right medicine. We'll get the trained counselors. We'll somehow find a way out of it. We'll do just fine. You do everything you can to manage the storm, and you fail. The storm wins. The storm is in control. It was only after their own efforts failed that the disciples decided to wake up Jesus. And I wonder, how long did they wait? I kind of imagine an argument. "Hey, Andrew, why don't you go back there and wake up Jesus?" "Not me. You wake him up." "James, you do it. Get him up." "No way. He's had a long day. He's not going to be happy." "Okay, guys, I got a plan. Rock, paper, scissors. We're going to decide. Loser wakes up Jesus." And when they did wake him up, what did they expect Jesus to do? He was a carpenter, not a fisherman. He didn't know anything about boats. I don't think the disciples had a plan. They were in all-out panic mode. But even in their panic, they made a good decision. They shifted their attention from the winds and the waves and the storm to Jesus. They recognized we can't handle this by ourselves. There's nothing we can do. We better wake up Jesus. Now, I kind of suspect Jesus would have calmed the storm at an earlier stage if they'd asked. But they waited until the situation was desperate before they woke up Jesus. Don't wait until it looks like you're going under. Instead, call on the Lord at the first sign of a disturbance. Lord, I'm not sure what that cloud is on the horizon. It may just be a few raindrops, or it could be a life-threatening storm, but I want you with me through it. I know that. I know if you're here in the boat with me, I have nothing to fear. When storms come, never forget, Jesus is in the boat with you. Jesus is in your boat. I understand you're in a storm, but you don't have to face that storm alone. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. The one who created this world and the one who overcame death is in your boat. You don't have to fear the storm because Jesus is in your boat. Now, if Jesus is not in your boat, if you choose to go it alone, you should be afraid. You should be in panic mode. I don't know how people face the storms of life without Jesus. Some of you, by your decisions, have decided to pilot your own life. You steered your way into a storm. Now you find yourself in a storm you can't handle, and Jesus isn't in your boat. You've crashed relationships, finances, hopes, dreams. You've got some fear, and you wonder, is it too late? Because I got here by myself. I'm the cause of this. Have I gone too far for Jesus to hear my cry for help? The disciples decided to wake up Jesus, and it was a rude awakening. I don't like getting woke up that way. They woke him up and said, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. And what you expect is for Jesus to say, okay, I'm the leader. Quick, start bailing water. You, John, take that oar. You should have woke me up earlier. We can do this. Come on, guys. Everybody on my call, row, row. Instead, Jesus looked at them, and I imagine these frantic disciples saying, Lord, wake us up, we're going to drown. And Jesus saying, oh, you of little faith. Why are you so afraid? Fear is the opposite of faith. I remember when Tyler was a little boy, and we were trying to get him to jump off the diving board for the first time. Tyler wanted nothing to do with it. It was way up in the air. It must have been at least 3 feet off the water. I was way down below him. I must have tread water for an hour under that diving board saying, son, don't worry. I'm here. You can trust me. We tried everything. We'll get you snow cones. We'll give you money. Son, you can trust me, jump. I mean, he'd get right to the edge, and then he'd go back, and he'd get right to the edge, and he'd go back. I was getting tired. But finally, faith and trust overcame his fear, and Tyler jumped. And you know what I did? Absolutely nothing. I let him hit the water and go under. He came up screaming. I just laughed watching him. Third time he came up, I grabbed him, threw him to his mama, and said, he's a mama's boy. You take care of him. Come on, I'm kidding. That's not what I did. You were believing that. Tyler jumped off the board, and I caught him. And then he said what every kid says. I want to do it again. And over and over and over and over, Tyler jumped off the board, and I caught him. Faith and his dad is why Tyler left his fear behind and decided to take the leap. The disciples trusted Jesus. They had faith in him, but when the storm came, their faith faltered. Jesus wasn't rebuking them for being afraid of the storm. I think the words that bothered him were not, there's a storm. I think the words that bothered him was, we're going to drown. And Jesus was saying, come on, really? I'm going to let you drown? Did I bring you out here so you could be destroyed by a storm? Where's your faith? Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. Mark, in his telling the story, gives us Jesus' words. Jesus stood up in the boat, and that in itself was hard enough. I mean, if it's a storm that's rocking the boat with the wind and the waves, standing up isn't easy. Jesus stood up, he looked at the wind and the waves. He didn't pray a long, fancy prayer. He didn't preach an elaborate sermon. He arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. There are a lot of wind and waves around us. Violence, racism, hate, anger, political chaos, immigration uncertainty, addiction, fear, North Korea, sickness, cancer. None of that knocks Jesus out of the boat. None of that intimidates him. In the middle of it all, in spite of it all, you can turn to Jesus, and with just 3 words, peace, be still, Jesus can calm your storm. Jesus is not intimidated. He's not afraid. He's with you. He's in the boat. He can and will speak peace to you, even in the middle of your most terrifying storm. At the start of this message, you heard Brittany talk about her storms. Now I want you to hear what she experienced and learned through those storms.
When I was 7, I was so distraught. I was aggravated because I had family drama. That was before my parents were divorced. So my parents were fighting. I was being bullied at school because I was different, and it was just so hard. And I was so mad at God because, you know, he was supposed to be the one who created me and put me in this family, and I couldn't understand that. And so finally I broke down completely and just got completely vulnerable with God and was like, God, if you put me here, why? Why would you do this? Like, I don't understand. And in that moment, he met me. And I can only describe it as he like picked me up like a father would pick up his little girl and carried me in his arms and was like, I didn't mean for it to be this way, but I'm here through it all, and I'm gonna walk you through this. And I said, okay, but you have to be my father. The one I have isn't good enough. He's not who I need him to be. But because of my faith in Jesus, he's always been my foundation, and because of that, I can stand through the storm.
In the eye of the storm, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. And you alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. When the solid ground is falling out from underneath my feet, between the black skies and my red eyes, I can barely see. And when I realize I've been sold out by my friends and my family, I can feel the rain reminding me. In the eye of the storm, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. When my hopes and dreams are far from me and I'm running out of faith, I see the future, a picture slowly fade away. And when the tears of pain and heartache are pouring down my face, I find my peace in Jesus' name. And in the eye of the storm, you remain in control. Oh, you remain in control of the war. You guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. Thank you, Jesus, for standing by me, Lord. When the test comes and the doctor says I've only got a few months left, it's like a bitter pill I'm swallowing, I can barely take a breath. And when addiction steals my baby girl and there's nothing I can do, my only hope is to trust in you. I trust you, Lord, in the eye of the storm. You remain in control, yes you do. In the middle of the war, in the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You guard my soul. You alone are the anchor. You're the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. Oh, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm.
If you're in a storm, never forget Jesus is in your boat. You're not in the storm alone. And you will come through. Not because of your ability, not because you're cute or special or smart or powerful, but because Jesus is in control. And He's promised never to leave you or forsake you and never to leave you alone in the storm. Would you bow your heads with me? Jesus, we are so thankful that you're with us in every storm. And Lord, I pray right now for people who are facing a storm physically, emotionally, financially, relationally. Lord, I pray that they would sense and know that you are with them. They're not alone in the storm.